Section 10 of Unmasked, or The Science of Immorality, to Gentlemen, by Mary Edwards Walker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 10. The Social Evil, Part 1. Reverend Dr. Muhlenberg, in one of his sermons, gave a withering reproof to fashionable woman church-goers as follows: "One of the great inducements to women to ply an immoral trade is a fondness for finery, copying their sisters in higher life, who, by their example of vain show in dress, have more to answer for in the matter than they suspect. Nothing could be truer, and when once in the vortex, they find they can live easier and more idly than in other ways, not knowing that they will soon lose the mental power to concentrate their energies on anything that would be honorably supporting, unless endowed with an unusual amount of will power. They do not understand that there is anything to be thought of in the case but a loss of the respect of people, an avoidance of childbearing, and precautionary measures against venereal diseases. They do not know that their passions will not always hold out, and they know nothing about the fearful drain upon their nerve forces. But one of the great motives in yielding in the first place with the masses of unfortunate women is a curiosity that is intensified with the inducements and with the natural instincts of everything that has life. We have failed to find any men speakers or writers that understand this, for the most abandoned will not acknowledge this to men who undertake to peer into their lives. Men cannot deal with this question properly because they do not understand women. The best of writers on this subject are full of false theories and false conclusions that the mass of women who read the same assent to, because it is considered something quite creditable among women generally to speak of the sexual relation as simply a marital acquiescence on the part of women who are married, and of great passions on the part of any woman who is having such relations out of marriage. The best of men writers, whose researches on these subjects have been great, will assert with all the assurance possible that women's passions are not as strong as men's, and they will bring what they term proof to bear them out in such assertions. But nothing could possibly be more radically false. On the other hand, the sexual passions of women are stronger than those of men, but the early training of self-control make the habits of continence so strong that men mistake self-control for weak passional natures. There are times in every month of menstruating women that only the moral sentiments save them. This is a perversion of the love of posterity that a combination of causes have produced. When the minute placenta is formed in the uterus and the ovum is awaiting the arrival of the sperm cells to unite with the germ cells, there cannot be a louder call than is made with the nerves of the vagina, all intensified with menstrual flow, that every month gives new power to the vaginal nerves. The very formation of woman ought to teach a scientific man that her excitement as a natural consequence would be far more intense than his. This is seen in the confessions of women whose husbands or lovers were using precautionary measures to prevent conception and were not permitted to do so. It is seen in abundant cases where women marry men far beneath them, and some widows resort to all sorts of measures to gratify the sexual passions and retain the respect of people by a chaste appearance if they can but gratify at all hazards. The greater strength of women's passions as compared with men is seen in their willingness to take all risks of passing through the agonies of abortions that are often greater than those of full-grown childbearing. We must take human nature as we find it, and then try to make the world better by lessons of history, observation, and experience. Social evils are unregulated passions as well as perverted passions, and the want of local bathing, the use of condiments and of stimulants are fruitful causes of such perversion. The unhygienic style of woman's dress, that compresses a portion of the body, and by its very length causes displacements of the uterine organs and defective circulation of the blood through them and contiguous organs, keeps up an excited condition. It is estimated that 7 tons of blood pass through the heart every 24 hours, and in doing this the blood is unnaturally heated in the organs of generation by the compression of the clothing around the waist and loins. All the theories of shoulder straps and bodies on petticoats relieving this condition are very plausible in the minds of men physicians who never can know by actual experience to how limited an extent is this true. The ordinary length of women's clothing, arranged as best it can be, is detrimental to the organs of generation, and much of the false reasoning on the subject has resulted from the ignorance of men doctors, who could not fully understand the subject because they are men. Not until women physicians experimented and traced cause to effect and effect to cause was this subject understood. The proper arrangement of women's clothing, the reform dress, must become general before there is any hope of mastering the social evil question. For while woman is kept unnaturally excited, or in a condition to be easily excited sexually, by the ordinary styles of her clothing, the social evil question will be one about which the brain will be muddled, and all efforts to reform by moral suasion, prayers, kindness, harshness, midnight meetings, houses of reformation, and other conceivable plans will bring but meagre and discouraging results. The same effect of unequally arranged dress on the nerves of sensation with the nervo-vital fluid is true, injuring women 1,000-fold worse than it is possible to injure men, because men have not the internal organs of generation that women have. Both women and men must understand the chapters on the language of the nerves and pure manhood, the necessity for daily local bathing, and the avoidance of all stimulants before the great problem of the cure of social evils are reached. And then both men and women must cultivate themselves in accordance with the highest ideas of both fatherhood and motherhood. We are rejoiced to have an opportunity to quote Jules Favre of the Corps Legislatif. He says, "The only way to solve the social evil problem is to elevate the standard of morals for men to that of the purest women." That is most excellent, but he nor any other man can see to the very bottom of the evil, or they would see that no one single effort or a single measure could do away with the monstrous evil. There is so much to be said upon this subject that full elaboration would be impossible in our limited space. We must at this time enter our protest against the course of so-called scientific men, who advise young men to cohabit with women to improve their health. It would be no more monstrous to give such advice to young women than it is to young men. The organs of generation are for the specific purpose of procreating, and if not used for that purpose, the natural means of ridding the system of an unusual accumulation is taken by nature. While marriage is favorable to health and longevity, because of many stimulants to exertion, such as children, and the accumulative interests consequent on marriage, we have abundant proof of the general good health of body and mind of those who have never married. Among such are the names of the following well-known women: Dr. Harriet K. Hunt, the first educated woman practitioner in America; Charlotte Cushman, the American theatrical star; Rosa Bonheur, France's greatest artist in animal painting; Florence Nightingale, England's most prominent army nurse; and Miss Burdett Coutts, the great English philanthropist. The lives of these women prove what can be achieved by using the powers in other directions than those of sex merely, and letting the reproductive organs rest from excitement of indulgence. Woman individually is the only one capable of judging when, how often, if ever, she is to take measures to become a mother, as all men are free to decide what is of immeasurable importance to them. Some of the greatest men that have ever lived have chosen never to marry, and have distinguished themselves by the use of brain power instead of draining their systems through their organs of sex. Among these are Sir Isaac Newton, Gibson the sculptor, Pitt the statesman, Baron von Humboldt the scientist, Kant the metaphysician, and Jakob Grimm the philologist. Unless there is a stay to the social evil, the time is not distant when the world will sink back into barbarism. The few who put on their virtuous cloaks to shield themselves from a discussion of these subjects, preferring rather to ignore evils in their own circles and let the rest of the world take care of itself, are of but little use to us or the rest of humanity. Ignoring the evils of life is not the philosophical way of treating them. They should be discussed by the deepest metaphysicians, and all should be taught their existence and consequences as to the safe measure of avoidance. They will learn it is impossible to prevent their gaining knowledge from the basest standpoints and through the most vulgar kind of language. How much better to be taught correctly and fill the minds with correct ideas and the true uses of all things. Science knows no false modesty. Much of the social evil is far beyond the sphere of legislation, but can be reached, and the wrongs thereof righted through knowledge in youth. The effects of tobacco on the organs of generation are well known to the profession as excitants, and also as having an effect on the early decay of the generative functions of both sons and daughters as well as parents. Dr. E. Phelps, professor for many years in Dartmouth College, Dr. Knapfies, the medical author, Dr. Pittock of London, Dr. C. McDougall, Dr. Wells, Dr. Trall, Drs. Fowler, Dr. Gardner, Dr. Smith, and a host of others learned in the profession are convinced of the social evils that are aggravated by the noxious weed tobacco. S. Weir Mitchell, M.D. of Philadelphia Infirmary for Nervous Diseases, in a recent paper says that tobacco is of all causes the most potent in giving rise to general nervousness. We hope the doctor will give a learned essay upon the effects on wives of men who use the noxious poison, by portraying at length how the lungs, the kidneys, the skin, and especially the prostate gland surrounding the urethra, gather up and throw out the poisons that are introduced into the system. The social evil among the married prevails to an extent that is appalling. The very influence of sexual variety that the husband carries to his wife through his nerves in his sexual relation with her impresses her with the idea of indulging in a variety also, and so the pure girl that he married with no other thought but of faithfulness to him, his own course of life has changed and made her unable to resist a variety life. Her husband seduces young girls and brings to her in his sexual relations with her the spirit of seduction of the innocent, and so she reasons that if there is something desirable in initiating young girls in sexual relations, that it must be equally so to initiate young men, and so she pursues her course. And just so long as men are unfaithful to themselves before or after marriage, will young men be seduced by married women. Such cases are increasing at a fearful rate, and will continue to increase until men who are stronger physically than women will refrain from degrading themselves by taking on the vile magnetism of illicit intercourse that, once imbibed, is ever after a part of the man as much as his hand, and is a part of the inheritance of posterity. Popular ignorance on these points will not affect the great laws, and while we have been able to make some discoveries in application of laws and principles of the science of life, we should consider silence upon such important matters a crime of great magnitude, when we contemplate that millions are living and billions unborn that are to be benefited by such knowledge. Both men and women suffer aside from the usual diseases of body and mind, who are actors in the social evil wrongs. Among the same are two that are fearful results: the prolapsus of the scrotum in man, and the terrible hemorrhages of the uterus in the change of woman's life. There are no reprieves from the prison of the soul, and no remitting of the penalties of outraged nature. Even in animal life there are marked instances of the great law. Somewhere there is a rebellion against such wrongs in the shape of a mare having but 2 legs, a heifer having an extra foot growing from the shoulder, a calf having 6 feet, etc. The magnetic power is the life, and to illustrate how poisoning is the variety touch, we relate the instances of the death of 2 of Barnum's choicest ponies. A woman so degraded that not even the lowest attaches of Barnum's shows would associate with her sexually was hired by them for a pony. The animal was fixed in a frame, but as soon as she was touched, he fell back dead. The same experiment was tried with another woman and another pony by these men with the same result. These women submitted to the degradation to get their bread, and for the pittance paid, Barnum lost his valuable ponies. Will men never see that in 1,000 ways their oppression of women are visited upon themselves? The above case is but a financial retribution, while the following is a physical one of a poignant nature. One of the young queens in the South Sea Islands married a prince who died while in the first act of coition. In due course of time, the next brother married her, with the same result. The third brother, according to the custom of every brother marrying his brother's widow until an heir was born, reluctantly married her, knowing that both his brothers had died from the effect of having the head of the penis entirely severed. He was cautious, and declared she had a little knife concealed inside of her, and as his mutilated condition was testimony in the case, she was killed, and examination revealed the attachment to the uterus of 3 small bones with sharp edges. Nature has strange freaks in her efforts to enforce her law of the rights of woman to her own person. We say freaks because we have not yet delved into the mysteries that envelop unusual cases. There are instances where the daughters born from marital rape have inherited such a power of vagina resistance that the coition grasp in orgasm has caused a man the most excruciating pain. There are 2 instances in this city that are known to be such. One is a case of a woman in good social position who has all the fierceness of passion of the father and the resistance of the mother, making her just the character she is. No man ever has but one sexual relation with her, and considers himself fortunate to be able to escape alive. It is utterly beyond her power to control in any degree the muscular tissues of the vagina, and the bruised condition of her victims are occasions of apologies and regrets. The woman has property, and when she fails to win a victim through ordinary arts, she pays a consideration for whoever she can get, but no amount of money can make a second purchase. The very atmosphere is filled with wrongs of man to woman of more or less aggravated character. Women are oppressed because they will not sink into the immoralities of the age, or even sanction the same. Woman is denied legislative justice because she has so much logic that she cannot see any reason why she has not as good a right to help to make and to administer laws that govern men and women as men have, and because she dares to dress as time-saving, health-saving, strength-saving, and money-saving manner as man. One class of men oppressed because woman lives up to the purest ideas of the grandeur of earth life, while another class oppress woman because she goes to the extreme of immoralities. The question might arise which class of men are the better of the 2. An eyewitness informed us of an instance of the latter that all men ought to know of. 16 men in one evening cohabited with one woman, and after the same, without one of them having given the degraded woman a penny, took a large dog, and with one accord compelled her to submit to another degradation. While grand and cultured women are oppressed in high places, the very atmosphere is filled with oppression that is meted out to other women by men of lower grades, in ways that would shock the former oppressors. Thus the sentiment of oppression carries with it no safety valve. The very sentiment preached, lived, or even cherished will return to your daughters through men of degraded habits, to sting like a viper, although you may have sung them as a bird before your reverses of station and of fortune. It is a hard matter to decide where the greater crime exists. whether in debasing a pure and true soul with brilliant attainments, or taking advantage of one with little mind and meagre attainments. Who shall decide which injures society the more? No canvas is of sufficient dimensions to delineate the features of these cases, but in the great future the canvas will be unrolled to view. Let imagination paint its own picture to every man according to life. One such will be related here. A young girl is the victim of a promising young man. He deserts her, and she sinks lower and lower, until she is a filthy, blear-eyed monster, sinking out of life in a below-stairs den, from which she is boxed up and sent to Potter's Field. The brilliant young man has so covered his various conquests that he has been called respectable all through life. He has wealth, position, a fine family, and finally dies in his palatial residence and is conveyed to the family vault with public honours. Voice and press are loud in extolling his virtues, while he is taking up his quarters in the realm of the disembodied. The first object that meets his eyes, grasps his hands, and speaks his name, is the degraded woman that is now one of the component parts of his hell. He starts in consternation. He tries to speak a begone. He attempts to wrench his hand from her grasp, but finds himself powerless. He then takes a retrospective view of his life, and goes into all the labyrinths of labyrinths through which his victim and victim of victims has passed, and with every thought and shadow of a thought comes home to him the dreadful realization that he has been the grand mogul of the pure creature's destiny before him. The company he sought in earth life and robbed of their magnetic power rushed to him in spirit life with all the bad magnetism that are far worse than a literal fire and brimstone. The son of a wealthy and prominent gentleman in a northern city, who was boarding at a fashionable hotel, took a woman in bed with his wife who had been a friend of hers. The shock of misplaced confidence in both of them was so great, and what of abuse was meted to the wife in other regards we may never know, that wife became so demented that she almost entirely lost the power of speech and scarcely knows enough to feed herself. This occurred several years since, and at last accounts she was still living and in the same condition. How the mental and physical could be so affected, just what process of action on both through the nerves was the cause of the result, is a study for the metaphysician, and until it shall be solved will come under the head of the unknowables. End of section 10. Section 11 of Unmasked, or the Science of Immorality, to Gentlemen, by Mary Edwards Walker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 10. Social Evil, Part 2. As the lower classes are so badly conditioned, we can only hope to right the wrongs of the social evils through science in the better classes of society as regards wealth and general culture. Not better as regards morals, save that there is less of positive brutality toward woman and more of wooing into evil. A case occurred in Washington as follows. A gentleman who was addressing a lady with the avowed intention of marriage did by positive force succeed in violating her person. He married her soon after, but he so shocked her sense of the proprieties of life, the selfhood of woman, and rights of woman to her own person, he so disgusted her with the sexual relation that she told him before marriage that she should never be party to such a relation again. They have been living together for nearly 20 years, and no influence could be brought to bear to induce her to change her resolution. She has been uniformly kind and attentive to him, except when the sexual relation has been suggested in any way, and then she has been endowed with superhuman power of resistance. He was not out of the borders of civilization, and could not do as one of the Indian agents did in Wisconsin a few years since, which was to hire 2 men to hold a squaw whom he had repeatedly failed to violate alone. How long will it take to prove to white squaws that men are women's protectors, and to dark squaws that the whites are a noble race sent by a great government to civilize them. How many prayers will it take to wash the soul of social evils gathered up in earth life, with many gathered up in ignorance of their permanence, but gathered for eternity? We have seen many times in our lectures that much of the failure to do justly to women was more a misfortune than a fault, because man does not understand woman, and never will while there is one iota of barbarism relics over women, preventing the largest freedom in thought and act. Imperfect laws must ever exist until there is perfect freedom for all the governed to make full statements regarding cause and effect in thousands of matters that men have no conception of, and never have even thought deeply enough to think it possible that there is a side beyond man's possible comprehension. Even as late as 1787, the subject was discussed regarding the complete evidence of rape. The thought never occurred to men, judges, or juries that a child or even a matured girl was ignorant of what an emission was, that she must swear to in order to prove rape. The common law would not take penetration as sufficient evidence of rape until the eyes of men were opened by the testimony of a woman who had borne several children that she could not swear that emission had ever taken place. Forcible penetration, whether in marriage rapes or in any other, at any time, more frequently than otherwise, causes more or less hemorrhage. In any case, the vagina seeks to protect itself from the injury of friction by lubricating with the natural secretions, if possible, but if not able to do so, then it is assisted by help from the uterus in an ill-timed menstrual discharge. There were no women on the dignified benches, nor in the ignorant boxes, for the age was not blessed by Justice Esther Morris, lawyer Belva A. Lockwood, juryman Mrs. Amelia B. Post, and Mrs. Editor Hayford, and a law journalist, Mira Bradwell. Forced contact of the genital organs should be met with the severest penalties of rape, since such an act is but premonitory to and with carnal intentions, and is prevented only by some circumstances connected with the case, such as being frightened by other parties appearing, or impossibility of penetration without serious results, etc., etc. Infants but 2 and 3 years of age are often raped by men of all ages, not only for present gratification, but to familiarize girls of immature ages with carnal matters, and to excite, so that seduction may be easy in future. We could mention many instances of this kind of outrage, but one will suffice. A case occurred in New Orleans 8 years since, where a young man of 19 years of age took his employer's little daughter of 3 years and gave her venereal disease. The attending doctor gave the author a history of the treatment of the case, with the minute vagina and urethra that made treatment so difficult and so uncertain regarding her future condition. The only just way to deal with a man guilty of rape is to castrate him, for a man who has once been guilty in the face of all the influences against what is worse than murder, a term in prison will not make respectable. The time is coming when a respectable lawyer will not defend such a man for filthy lucre. He or she will not draw up every point of law and twist it so as to defeat justice. It is a lamentable fact that nearly every case of rape gives a ruined victim to the world, for the vile magnetism that is imparted by the fiend is so infused in the system of the victim that vice of the various grades is irresistible. See the language of the nerves. Let judges and juries hereafter look upon and talk up to juries the metaphysical injuries, as no courts have ever done before. Let no lawyer plead an afterlife of an injured girl as a reason why there should be no verdict against him. So long as children are begotten by force, so long as boys have the example that physical strength shall rule over women of any age, or under any circumstances in life, will the outrage of rape be committed. More children are begotten in marital rapes than in any other way. If the ovum is in a proper condition and is met by the spermatozoa conception must result, for the laws of conception cannot be controverted by anger or hatred on one side, and outraged womanhood on the other. The ordinary dress of women of all ages makes the facilities for rapes complete, and until the moral reform undersuits, and indeed the whole reform dress is worn, the best of girls and even women will be raped by certain classes of men. The first step toward making the world better morally is comprehended in not only a full knowledge of the effects of vice as seen in the language of the nerves, but in all womanhood being properly protected by dress in its best style. The ordinary dress of woman, by debilitating her body, causes her mind to be also weakened. Woman is, if not in absolute misery from dress, so uncomfortable that she cannot think gravely and deeply. If a man has but a sliver in his finger, he cannot write a fine article or do himself justice in a speech. That is as nothing compared with the enervating effects and miseries of woman caused by dress. In order to have a sound moralist, one able to cope with life as it is, and leave pure examples as well as precepts, the dress question is of practicable importance. How much of immorality is directly chargeable to woman's dress, we cannot pretend to elaborate in this work. This much we will affirm, that there will be scarcely any perceptible difference in the tone of morals, difference for the better, until both immature and mature woman is protected by dress, as no women are who dress in the ordinary styles. This is so well known that it needs no mention, only to remind the better class of men that while there are all around us women dressed so that the facilities of vice are perfect, we can expect nothing better than street rapes occasionally, and parlor rapes without number. We cannot too strongly impress upon the fathers of daughters their duty in seeing that their little girls are instructed in regard to the certainty of protecting themselves against rapes by grabbing the testicles. So sensitive are they that a man is at once weakened and made powerless to injure woman. A case occurred in Pennsylvania where a young girl learned that her seducer was about to marry. When she saw him again, he renewed his immoral attentions to her, with a response from her hands in the shape of actually fracturing the muscles of the penis. The best of medical attention was procured, but he was forever crippled and disabled. But the injury to the testicles is as effective a protection and much easier, and when women generally understand their power of protection, by knowing how sensitive is the scrotum, rapes will be fewer. But sexual wrongs will not cease until the reform dress becomes general. The underclothes are so constructed that a rape would be impossible. Reform underdress. The undersuits are perfect covering from head to feet. They are so arranged as to be a perfect protection. They are economical as regards amount of cloth and washing. One suit comprising drawers, chemise, and cuffs. The stockings are drawn over the drawers, doing away with the necessity for any devices to hold up the stockings. Nothing has been invented in the shape of stocking suspenders that are not injurious in some way. It will be readily seen that there are no bands around the waist, as is the case where drawers are worn in the usual way. No one's hips can support drawers or petticoat bands without injury to the kidneys and bladder in men, and to those organs in women, besides the more serious effect of a pressure upon the internal organs of woman. They are directly over the fallopian tubes, ovaries, and top of the uterus, injuring by inflaming as well as prolapsing. All kinds and classes of evils show their own legitimate effects in a diversity of ways, unexpected as well as anticipated, for no evil stops with a single result. To such an extent is this true, that the most logical and metaphysical are filled with surprises regarding what were yesterday casual discoveries and reliable evolutions of thought, and with expectations regarding what is today acknowledged to be buried as unknowables. Years and ages elapsed before some features of the mighty predictions in regard to the sins of the parents being visited upon children's children were seen in their unmistakable truths as antenatal results. But no mind can fully compass this prediction of the seers, or rather the philosophical metaphysicians of the past. Even today but few rush back to causes for lessons of prevention, but blindly walk forth with their sophistry regarding cures in the shape of prisons, asylums, almshouses, midnight meetings, and reform schools. An opportunity is afforded to illustrate the deep-rooted and wide-branched antenatal evils both in China and America, since 100,000 Chinese have come to our western shores. Only about 10,000 of these are women. Fashion in China has made women helpless, and therefore crippled their morals by crippling their feet and unfitting them to perform the active duties of life. And so the homework is done by men. The outrageous crippling of women all over by dress, unfitting all American women for the duties of life, both among the rich and the servant classes, has made it imperative that men should take the places of house servants and maids of all work. This demand is supplied by the Chinamen. They perform all the household duties the same as a girl would do, and is it at all surprising that, being so constantly with women and girls of the family, men with all the passions of men without much culture of brain, is it, we repeat, surprising that with only one China woman in the country to 9 Chinamen, that such men should by both foul and fair means improve sexual opportunities, since a large number of even this small number of China women are used exclusively by American men, and these men the husbands and fathers of their employers. The American women before and since their residence in the far West found it impossible to employ white girl labor without their husbands and sons having sexual commerce with them, and now the tables are unexpectedly turned, and husbands and fathers can no longer expect purity at home, except where it is from intelligence and not from ignorance and protective exclusion. Men's wives all over the country are ripe for anything, since their husbands, through the language of the nerves, and in so many ways, have proved their own course of life and unwittingly paved the way for their wives and daughters to walk therein. As true as the needle points to the pole is the condition of the women of the country ebbing with billow swiftness to the heartless shoals of sexual license. Woman's dress. The question of dress and the social evil is so great that we can but mention the same in this work. We quote from Men and Women as follows: "Here I wish to call attention to another point of practical utility, the relation of dress to prostitution. Long ago I observed that in peasant life, where dress was loose and simple, illegal prostitution was nearly unknown. In cities where cost in cut and quality of dress are extreme, the greatest proportion of prostitutes to the whole population is found. Investigation has even proven that the excess of costume and adornment exhibited is matched by excess proportionate in social vice and intemperance generally. It is found that of abandoned women, not over 1 in 20 are so from choice, not over 1/5 from real necessity, and the majority are so from a desire to dress as richly as the wealthy when their earnings are insufficient. Dress and the fatigue of laboring in its perplexities is the first inducement." T.W. Organ, M.D., Ohio. That woman should be the victim to customs so demoralizing and destructive to the highest good of all is the misfortune of her sex, the curse of the race. How intelligent, aspiring women can consent to drape themselves in costumes that are a badge of servitude and an emblem of imbecility is a problem unsolved. To philanthropic minds, no subjects seeking the general welfare appeals for aid with more reason than this of substituting comfort and freedom for torture and tyranny in dress. Considering how it cripples the physical and dwarfs the mental faculties, how aesthetic culture and soul aspiration are defeated, we find pressing incentives to earnest effort for its overthrow. Brave souls with persistent energy consecrate their lives to the service of humanity. S. L. O. Allen, South Newbury, Ohio. I sympathize with all who cry and sigh for deliverance from the fickle yet persistent goddess, Fashion, who subjugates nearly all the women of our land. It astonishes me that they so easily yield, when their freedom needs but general revolt. How can a man think his daughter equal to his son, when she finds satisfaction in bonnets, sleeves, and skirts that forbid achievements, and he is intent on vast interests? Women have always been slaves, and are, if not wholly, on the chattel principle. They consent to be so shackled and enfeebled by fashion, that the few who know what they want have not mind force to put on the means of power, the emblems of liberty, and take both as fast as able. Of all the difficulties with which she now contends, none is more serious in direct and remote bearings than the dress imposes. The great thing in the way of deliverance is that fashion makes her dress not only the symbol of her sex, but of inferiority because of sex. I care not so much that sex be shown by her dress, as that it thereby compels her to suffer disadvantage in the use of her powers. J.C. Jackson, M.D., Danville, New York. Would that I could encourage weak, deluded women to be true to themselves, abandon slavery to fashion, and gain strength to fulfill life's duties joyously. Mrs. S. E. Michener, California. Men and women, while acknowledging the ravages that fashion makes on health, insist that the style we substitute must be beautiful, and that garments clothing the legs separately are homely and unattractive, though exceedingly convenient. They do not reject the most deforming device of fashion. The difficulty is plainly here. Long habit and transmitted tendency have so accustomed the mind to follow the frequent changes of fashion, that it readily assumes that the last style is preferable, and accepting without comparing and choosing for itself, individuality is silenced and weakened, and only the false notion that drapery alone is feminine speaks in taste. Conceding the point of a general chain of consistency, all that is required to make a natural dress beautiful is use. If long use can make the caricatures that licentiousness and avarice have palmed on the ages appear beautiful, have no fears that something comforting, strengthening, liberating, and rejoicing will not prove beautifying. End of section 11. Section 12 of Unmasked, or the Science of Immorality, to Gentlemen, by Mary Edwards Walker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 10, Social Evil, Part 3. While bodies are caged in the petticoat badge of dependence and inferiority, minds and souls are subject to evil psychologizing wills and cannot command themselves, whereas crowns of strength, joy, and sufficiency, with choice of place in the exercise of power, awaits the unbound woman. Fearing to put forth endeavors because all cannot see and approve the purpose involved, because children accustomed to wading cannot appreciate walking, would be cowardice withering to my spirit. Mary E. Tillotson, Vineland, New Jersey. Women having no proper physical training or scientific advantages, no highly remunerative employment or official trust, they are as a rule untaught, unskilled, unenterprising, hence have thought more of adorning the body than of high culture. To captivate the superior sex, win approval and companionship, has seemed the aim, dress the means. Fashion and goods speculators see their chance and make both dupes and fortunes by millions, reckless of the ruin. Deploring the grave dilemma, I gladly hail every earnest movement among women, however difficult, to correct the bad taste, pernicious example, and foolish stupidity seen in the wasteful profusion and absolute deformity of fashion. I would encourage the institution of a style for women, combining neatness, propriety, artistic skill, with entire freedom of choice, and in accordance with the laws of health. William L. Garrison, Boston, Massachusetts. My motto is dress in utility, comfort, economy. Lucretia Mott, Philadelphia. I think the tyranny of fashion and dress the greatest obstacles to reform. C. A. Bartol, Boston, Mass. I feel anxious that this dress movement, so well begun, should be carried out by American women on American soil. Popular opinion ever opposes reforms, and makes them move like ships against headwinds. A. B. Bradford, Enon Valley, Pennsylvania. In view of the immense importance of rightly relating clothing to the law controlling these precious living temples, no more sacred theme can claim our care. Looking on humanity today, the most striking abuse of law is apparent in the burdens dragged by women in lieu of legitimate dress. A thorough, radical change in their style becomes at once a necessity. William S. Flanders, Cornville, Maine. Leaden apathy or racking pain is far nearer the rule with us than the exception. It needs no argument to convince thoughtful observers that the most prolific cause of this is the pernicious modes of prevailing dress. J. Chase, Vineland, New Jersey. The woman whose dress shows she is human proves she is worthy of equity. Women cannot grasp and shape their destiny till done through physical freedom, till feet are free as hands, legs as free as arms. J. Treat, New York. The styles of the civilized world, so called by the monster monarch, fickle fashion, are irrational, life-destroying, mind-belittling, brain-heating, waist-compressing, ankle-wrenching, feet-pinching, back-breaking, lust-engendering, child and mother-murdering, race-degrading. Women should see that asking rights is useless till they take the right to clothe themselves at least as comfortably as men. J. M. Allen, Massachusetts. Preaching freedom in fetters. What can be said of the many woman speakers advocating liberty, equality, spiritual elevation, and moral reformation, yet pleading with bodies, legs, and feet almost helplessly hampered? I view them with a sickening sense, pity them from the deeps of a sad soul, and exclaim, "Poor sick sisters! The most that you are doing is to burlesque your weak, coward selves. You fall before a juggernaut that has no palliating merit. What is life without health? What value has freedom without power to use it?" S. Mitchell, Vineland, New Jersey. When a dress prevails that gives full scope to all bodily powers, long depressed womanhood may reach normal endowment. A. R. Davis, Worcester, Mass. Reformers aiming at a style to serve health and all the duties and high attainments of our manifold capacities are right, and should be abetted by all lovers of human welfare. J. M. Spear, Philadelphia. To enlightened taste, that is truly beautiful which is in harmony with law and immutable order. Whatever dwarfs human powers comes of ignorance, tends to weakness and woe, and is deformity. D. M. Allen, South Newburgh, Ohio. I cannot express my admiration of woman's reformed dress. E. M. Howard, Ohio. It is a sorry sight to see a specimen of elaborately dressed frailty, and know that in those lovely shoes are comfortless feet, in that coil of beautiful hair an aching head, and under exquisite folds and puffs all manner of pads, pains, and miseries. Two things seem needed to remedy abuses in dress. First and best is independence in women. A professional man whose wife wishes to wear a short dress fears it would compromise him in his profession. He makes her carry his fortune on her hips. A husband would look better saying, "My dear, dress comfortably if you can." Rev. S. C. Beach, Norton, Massachusetts. How can those who ever call for the freedom they have not persist in trampling on the more important rights they possess? Their style of dress embarrasses every motion, and makes a most aggravated slave of the ever-worried body, and through that the never free or full-grown mind. Healthful dress cannot well be unbecoming. Tight waists, draggling skirts, half-clothed legs, for a business woman, are worse than ludicrous, are suicidal. S. L. Tibbles, Manchester, Virginia. My dress is what is known as the American costume. I have no thought of returning to the slavery and corruption of fashion, but do expect to change my style when finding what is better. I have travelled much, and know the slights, cold shoulders, jeers, etc., that the ill-bred offer. L. F. Stegman, Allegan, Michigan. Merciless fashion annually sacrifices millions of human beings on its murderous altar. A sound mind in a sound body, a free mind in a free body, means something that ought to open women's eyes to the duties they owe themselves. Girls study physiology and are not taught to apply its lore or regard its many warnings. Their lives pay the penalty. J. H. Cook, Columbus, Kansas. The varied benefits and constant comforts of my dress are so great that no temptation to return to swaddling clothes has assailed me. And yet underlying this important change is a principle that should prompt us to persevere if selfish aids should prove, as some have said, not compensatory. Abolishing the servile imitation of degrading customs, especially in dress, is among earth's imperative duties. Emmeline A. Prescott, North Vassalboro, Maine. Experience teaches me that a woman may wear the costume and gain respect by simply respecting herself. See Fanny Allen, Stoneham, Mass. I have made my own way in the world, have succeeded in the vocations of teacher, merchant, and farmer, traveled from Maine to Florida, met all shades of treatment, from profound respect and high encomium to low shouts of rabbles and the hiss of well-dressed bipeds. Think I never talked with a stranger who was prejudiced against the dress without making the path easier for the next one he may meet in the American costume. Through all opposition, the personal benefits of the reform have compensated, but had it been mainly sacrifice, the thought of working for the amelioration of woman and the elevation of humanity would still have been the beacon star guiding me on amid all discouragements. S. P. Fowler, Vineland, New Jersey. The sympathies of my soul are with those laboring to convince weak women that they need not obey life-torturing fashion. F. E. Reese, Minnesota. We should have liberty to experiment with the widest range of garments, and use any that are adapted to our taste, needs, and employments, without private or public molestation. Until this can be done, all discussions on the relative capacity of men and women are ill-timed and in bad taste. Olivia Shepherd, Vineland, New Jersey. Yielding to usage and prejudice lulls conscience, and fearing gossip checks the course of knowledge. Women aspire to high culture and pursuits, and seem not to know her slavery to dress forbids attainment. L. E. Jackson, M.D., Dansville, New York. The laws of health, beauty, fitness, economy, convenience, comfort, and decency are violated in most of women's present styles. All know what is threatened if we call our brother a fool, but I call him who weds a fashionable woman in these times a fool, and risk consequences. His risk must surely be great as mine. Saying less, I should be unworthy to subscribe. Friend of Humanity. P. Pillsbury, Concord, New Hampshire. For 25 years I have been teaching medical classes to trace most of society's maladies, especially those of women, to the dress that devitalizes the whole system, hence deteriorates the offspring, early made orphans. It has long been my custom to classify the 4 leading curses of civilization thus: first, alcohol; second, tobacco; third, drugs; fourth, fashion. But the more familiar the subject becomes, the more I see of incurable cases, traceable to corsets and draggling skirts, meretricious headgear, and leg-beating flounces, the surer I come to reverse the order and place fashions in dress at the head of the horrid category. No woman dressed fashionably can breathe or walk normally. Without free respiration no pure blood flows, giving firm muscle to act and vigorous brain to think and feel. Just to the extent that she constricts the lungs, loads the hips, oppresses the head, and burdens the limbs, she demoralizes her whole nature, becomes morbid, demented, paralyzed, and perverse. I see no hope of her attaining relief or higher conditions of any kind. till ceasing to display in costume the badges of self-imposed degradation, and banishing the scarecrow whim that natural hygienic dress is unwomanly, takes the free use of lungs, ribs, legs, and feet. R. T. Trawl, M.D., Florence, New Jersey. Fashionable attire is ruinous to the sexual organs of women. Dr. Sarah B. Chase, New York City. If space permitted, we could make many thousands of quotations, but these could not all speak so emphatically as the lives of such dress reformers as Dr. Susan Way Dodds, St. Louis, Missouri; Dr. Lydia Sayer Hasbrouck, Middletown, New York; Dr. Lydia A. Strobridge, Cortland, New York; Dr. Ellen Baird Harmon, Florence, New Jersey, and other physicians who are practicing exponents of the vital principles so important to overburdened women. The doctor, whether man or woman, who does not advocate a reform costume for woman, clearly shows an ignorance of the causes of diseases and displacement in woman, not only, but fails to comprehend one of the chief causes of the deaths of 100,000 infants annually, the imbecility and diseases of boys as well as girls, besides the tendency to insanity and a long train of evils that one with large causality and metaphysical acumen is appalled at beholding. Such an array of evils grow out of woman's ever-changing, extravagant, licentious, debilitating, diseasing, immoral, doll-baby dress that fashion imposes upon women, that make the great mass of them perfect monomaniacs on dress, that appalls a practical exemplar of modest, useful, economical, moral, healthful, common-sense costume. Men who encourage this, and women who talk about reform schools or reforms of any kind, so arrayed in gewgaud, had better repeat the words of Edward Faxton until they can fully understand them. They who would reform others must first reform themselves. These diamond words are utterances so deep and comprehensive that those who do not heed them are sure to find themselves in a position too ridiculous for common pity. But a little time will elapse before the world will see this truth in all its clearness. Reforms of all kinds are so linked and interwoven that they must progress together, but in order to be permanent they must have the foundations secure. Such foundations are in health of body and mind, and the ordinary costume of women disease both. Not only do they have this effect on women and their children, both girls and boys, but husbands of such wives suffer also. They are irritated in their sexual organs, and they seek other women for relief. The irritability is an effort to throw off impure elements, and the more the remedy, either in variety or excess, is sought, the harder nature labors to throw off the deleterious elements gathered up, producing still greater irritability that is mistaken for strength of passion. Every means is devised to satisfy this morbid state, and with shame for the depravity of human nature we record that in our own country not ordinary men, but so-called gentlemen, are guilty of using the rectum of their wives. This is for the double purpose of getting strong muscular contraction and to prevent conception. There is no language that can express the more than barbarous outrage of such acts. The agony that is experienced by woman until the sphincter ani is so expanded and lacerated that it has lost contractile power cannot be expressed. Such is the construction of the rectum that large feces can without difficulty be voided, but nothing of half the size can be introduced without extreme agony. Not only, but after the inflammation subsides, there is a tenderness and uncomfortableness, besides an inability to control the fecal discharge, necessitating them to wear a protector from exposure. They cannot sit down without being in misery. Their whole nerve system suffers from this most cruel tyranny. Cancer of the bowels finally results, but the men are not exempt from penalties for violation of law. The nearer the worn-out, effete matter approaches the exit, the more poisonous it becomes, and neither sitz baths or enema can cleanse the parts, so that much remains in the multitudinous folds. This filthiness is absorbed by man, and produces a depravity that he cannot throw off, besides urethral stricture, caused by repulsion to the filthy unnaturalness of such contact. The bare proposition from a husband to a wife for such a relationship ought to be a sufficient cause for divorce, but when it comes to compulsion, imprisonment for life ought to be the penalty. Astonishing as it may seem to women, there are many men who actually believe that no rape of any kind can be committed on women. They have this idea from the illustration of Queen Elizabeth of England, who would not sign any death warrants because she believed that every woman could take care of herself. She did not realize in her protected position how brutal men would dare to be, and how much greater was man's physical strength. Men will never have just laws until women physicians are in the great councils of the nation. Nothing but the sternest sense of duty to helpless women could compel us to pen what is so revolting to every sense of decent humanity as is the shameful recital of outraged decency just related. Moral courage is carried to its greatest tension, but above all this, a whisper of encouragement comes as we write through blinding tears what we have been long agonizing over the necessity for writing, and struggling to get moral courage enough to carry out our convictions, that ignoring evils can never remedy them. The illogical and surface-wise, but deeply ignorant, cannot see the necessity for arraying the evils of all classes before the broad light of day, and disgusting the beholders, little realizing that there is no effectual way of destroying the moths of corruption that eat out all grandeur of soul in the dark of ignorance and vice, and that sunlight of facts alone can do so. We place evil on a pedestal and array the results around it, and behold the effect. We call forth eternal principles and calmly discuss them. If silence could do the work, all Christendom could not open our mouth. But as nothing but an expose of the wrongs to woman and the wrongs to pure manhood can be rightened and prevented, all Christendom cannot close our mouth. Every wrong, no matter how base, has advocates attempting to justify the same not only, but to establish it as a right. It matters not how monstrous it may be. But of all the iniquities of the social evil we have yet to relate, the following as the most heinous possible. The idea has been disseminated that the eating of semen by women and the sipping of the exudations of women by men will promote health, prolong life, and promote beauty. This consummation of the basest of degradations is practiced not only by the fast, but by husbands and their wives. The public money might better be expended in teaching the monstrousness and results of baseness so vile that adjectives cannot be found sufficiently expressive to reach the case, instead of arresting for disseminating obscene matter. Such degradation not only debases, so that the whole expression of face is soon so hateful that one is repelled at a glance, but the brain is so injured that an incurable phase of insanity results. What is thrown off by men and women have a certain mission and effect, and is then not only of no more use, but is a positive injury if retained. Nature makes no mistakes, and her laws cannot be infringed without penalties. Nothing feeds the system that is taken into the stomach only as it goes through the processes of digestion and assimilation, and instead of such disgusting uses of effete matter being beneficial to the organs of generation, they are serious detriments. It does seem that the depths of human depravity have been reached, and it is time that human beings realized that there is something better in life than making a study how to turn all the best of energies to licentiousness. It is a great mystery to many why men in high, lucrative, and responsible positions cannot resist temptations to frauds, thefts, embezzlements, etc., but to us it is not so strange, since it is well known that wine, women, and iniquities have always been classed together. The women who are the victims of such men must dress fashionably in order to keep in their graces, and the men well know that large sums of money must be given women in order to have them dress well and live in a style becoming a mistress of theirs. It is necessary, in order to cloak the true life of the woman, for the man to furnish means sufficient to have her be living on a seeming income. Thus the true relationship is covered up for a time, and calls seem to be those only of ordinary friendship in the position. These women, constantly living false lives of respectability, must of necessity be avaricious, since fashions are ever changing, and to dress as well as the wives, daughters, or sisters of the men that support them, and in whose society they mingle, a large amount of money is necessary. The relationship sexual with such women so fills such men with the avarice that they imbibe with them, through the magnetic influences of the relation, that such men are fit for any crimes to gain money. Men lose the moral power to resist evils when they take upon themselves the vile magnetisms of such women, who obtain a power over them that cannot be thrown off immediately. They lose the power of will, and no matter how much of their reason may protest against their course, it is of no use when will is powerless. We are not sure that it would not be a moral crime for any one to be silent who sees the causes and effect of human wrongs, and how government as well as individuals suffer, because the true reasons have not been clearly set forth, and men give line upon line, precept upon precept, until the continued warnings shall be heeded. End of section 12. Section 13 of Unmasked, or the Science of Immorality, to Gentlemen, by Mary Edwards Walker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 10, Social Evil, Part 4. Masturbation. There has never been a religious sect that has inaugurated the all-important law of protection to the unborn as have the Mormons. If all the evils with which they have been charged were true, they would weigh but little in comparison with the great and important ideas that they have established regarding the perfect protection of the enceinte woman from sexual abuse. All the strength of mind and body go to build up the child in utero, instead of enfeebling it by any sexual relation. Children born with such antenatal conditions have so much better nerves and better control of their organs of sex that they will have no desire to practice masturbation, to be polygamists or sensualists. A large number of Mormons are not polygamists in practice, and do not use tobacco or any intoxicating drinks, and so we must look to the Mormons for a better race of people. Purity of manhood must come from the Mormons in greater numbers than from any other church, unless there is a radical change in the churches, by advising the selfhood of women in the marriage relation to be sustained by their church creeds. Then will masturbation be lessened, and with a knowledge of its effects soon cease altogether. The world was shocked when Fowler and Wells sent forth the truths to the world regarding the practice of masturbation being so great among the young. Many people were quite angry because of the sweeping assertions made by these doctors, but close observation proved that all was true. The great injury to body and mind from this cause cannot be computed. The wrecks in insane asylums all over the country, the loss of general health, the inability to be stable, and a long category of evil results are now clearly to be discerned, all of which result from the utter ignorance of the subject. Tobacco, intoxicating drinks, pepper, and the heating and dragging of the mother's clothing all affect the boy in utero, so that an effort for relief is made by masturbation. The boys of today have more to contend with because of their antenatal conditions than is apparent to those who have had but little thought upon the subject, for they are born with an inflamed prostate gland. This is situated around the urethra, and in masturbation, long before puberty, gives forth a discharge. After puberty, it frequently occurs that no amount of sexual variety or excess will prevent men from masturbation. This is sometimes practiced in the beds of their wives. This is more frequent after middle life than at any other time. Nature takes away the power of sexual gratification from men at a certain age. The time varies, and men who do not understand this law rush to physicians for remedies. Excesses in sexual commerce and masturbation both leave old men with an irritable condition of the organs of sex, owing to an inflamed and enlarged prostate gland. The old man must pay for his iniquities in other ways than those usually considered. Not only are the boys addicted to this practice as a result of the causes just mentioned, but one has only to visit the teachers of schools of every grade and age where girls are sent to be convinced to what extent the wrongs of parents are visited upon daughters as well as sons. No one can practice this vice without the sure marks of the same being left in the face. In a certain country, the making of rubber male organs for the purpose of facilitating girls in masturbation is a lucrative business. The cost of manufacturing is about 30 cents, and they retail it from $2 to $3. They are of different sizes, and girls of various ages are taught by their companions their uses. When one size is outgrown, a larger size is purchased. They are kept at fancy shops attended by women who ask their lady customers what number of the lady's companion they wish to have done up with their bundle. When the lady begins to talk about the magazines of that name, she is informed that the companion is in a box. This kind of masturbation, like all other ways of secret vice, sooner or later leads to sexual relations. The effects of this vice on men are numerous. The most usual are consumption, insanity, softening of the brain, and disease of the cuticle, and while all these are the effect on women, there is also an elongation of the clitoris and a formation of warty excrescences on the vulva. Men or women who are addicted to this vice cannot become parents of either a superior mental or physical type of humanity because of loss of power. Such a person cannot be a desirable husband or wife because of the loss of magnetic power. Nothing so destroys the ability to think deeply, logically, gradually, and connectedly as does orgasm, even in the natural way if frequent, but especially is this true when produced in other ways. The Oneida community learned this and soon incorporated the idea in their religious teachings, and would have deserved the name of perfectionists if they had lived up to their ideas and not substituted promiscuity under certain arrangements. Their infringement of the great law that sexual relation should not be had without emission, and that for posterity alone, has aroused the thinker to decide that they have retrograded rather than advancing, for the long-continued sexual excitement with suppressed orgasm is a serious injury to both body and mind. Nature provides that the secretions of the relation should be properly mixed, one purpose of which is to soothe the nerves of both organs. Their relationship is one of organized sensuality that does not fail to produce direful results on the minds and bodies of their participants. And but for the Oneida women wearing reform dresses, having an excellent diet, being systematic in exercise, and not being overworked, the bad results would be still more apparent. The redeeming feature of the men in never coercing women into sexual relationships has induced abused women to join the Oneida community. But we must forever condemn the double masturbation that sexual relation certainly is, when for licentious purpose alone, instead of for the procreation of humanity. But for women submitting to promiscuous sexual relations, they could not have their homes. This we assert as a rule. Their submitting will make secret vice in their children a certain result, for such an excitement of the organs of sex cannot fail to produce their legitimate results in posterity. It is well for the world that all kinds of experiments to evade the great and beautiful law of monogamic purity are being tested in a free country, in an unrestrained manner under the law of religious liberty, for it is only through all of these experiences that those incapable of metaphysical depth can see the great laws of beauty and harmony as exemplified in the grandeur of a life free from all the objectionable features that such experiments have disclosed. All kinds of vices and outrageous ways of human beings have caused some geniuses to invent remedies for relief from results in the shape of supporters, pessaries, trusses, uterine elevators, suspension bandages, etc., etc. But not until 1870 was the perfection of an equal to the Spanish Inquisition patented by the United States. No doubt the inventor's intentions were good, as the following will show. My invention is a device for so covering up the sexual organs of a person addicted to the vice of masturbation from his own touch and control, that he or she must refrain from the commission of the vicious and self-degrading act. It is well known to those who have the charge of prisons, reform schools, and the like, that the practice of masturbation becomes all but universal among those confined therein. It is also well known to physicians and to some heads of families that multitudes of children of both sexes injure their moral and physical natures for life by the practice of this vice. My invention is designed to put it into the power of those who have the control of all such persons to entirely prevent the practice. We well knew that it came from a man, and he not a physician, for no intelligent woman would have been guilty of sending forth such an instrument, and when there shall be a woman doctor as an examiner for all articles intended for the use of women, nothing so monstrous will ever be patented. We will go farther and say cruel. Here is the description. A band encircling the body just above the hips, the band being locked together behind by a small padlock or other suitable device, the key to which is to be carried by the person who has charge of the masturbator. In front, this band is connected by numerous strips with the lower band, which at the rear passes down one end under the leg, and both ends are attached to the rear of the pouch, which pouch is made somewhat bag-like for the purpose of containing the organs. The front part of the pouch is attached to the lower band in front of the person. These various parts, the upper and lower bands, the connecting strips, and the pouch, may be of cloth, leather, or metal, or in fact any other convenient material. If made of metal, the parts which bear against the body must be padded to prevent chafing and injury to the person. The pouch should, at least I so prefer it, be made of rubber or metal, and at the rear a small hole or spout is left for the discharge of urine. The apparatus must be so fitted to the body as to have the edges of the pouch fit close against the person, so that it will be impossible for the wearer to touch the confined organ. If the connecting strips are made of metal, they should be hinged or pivoted to both the upper and lower bands, so as to allow free movement of the body. In addition to its property as a protector, this device serves a useful purpose in sustaining the bowels like a truss, or as furnishing the foundation for the attachment of shoulder braces. It is recommended that all the parts be made as flexible as is consistent with the office they have to perform. In the first place, there is no necessity for such an inquisitorial device, for a reform dress will prevent seduction and rape. If only pants are made in the ordinary way of slash fronts, anything of the kind would be impossible, for the vagina is so far from the center of the pants, rape could not be committed. The undersuit is so constructed that a second barrier would also be met, and a third also in the second suit that is worn, as muslin and flannel are both worn, made in the same way. If for the purpose of preventing masturbation, a straitjacket will remedy that, but for the device itself, if worn in the daytime, in order for it to be large enough to cover the parts and snug enough to prevent the vice being still practiced, it would interfere not only with locomotion, but so heat the parts that it would excite and agonize, besides inflaming the parts covered, and no matter what amount of padding, it would irritate all around the pouch. The undried urine would agonize the girl. As for the strips around the legs, all women who wear the ordinary supporters with only cotton strips complain of chafing. As for the padlock behind, that would prevent laying on the back. The bands around the body would so press upon the hips and body as to prevent laying on either side, but that is not the worst feature. No one can lay down and be at all comfortable with any fastenings around them, besides the positive injury to all pelvic organs, and no one can endure anything as snug around them when laying down as when sitting or standing, and if loose enough to be endurable, it could not be a preventive to masturbation. Any bands of any kind around the body are injurious, we repeat, to impress the fact. To prevent an inclination to masturbation is the object of the wise. Do away with tobacco, strong drink, and petticoats and parents, and children will not desire to commit the deed. Teach the children to eschew tobacco, strong drinks, pepper, and petticoats, and they will not be victims of social evils of any grade, if Unmasked is put into their hands at an early age. Where is there a father that will not thank the hand that saved both his boys and his girls by giving them a knowledge of all the evils of the world, that they may be forewarned and forearmed in their young years before they learned by sad experience? Any government, whether national or local, that obtains revenues from vice of any kind, whether it be intoxicating drinks, tobacco, or contagious disease acts, pay dearly for such oversight, such ignorance, such downright crime. When there is proper legislation regarding the manufacture of a sufficient quantity of intoxicating beverages for the arts, and a penalty for further destruction of grain and fruit food, a penalty for the manufacture of tobacco or putting it into the market without strychnine, or something so disgusting that it will not be used for other than insect exterminators, then we can, with a diffusion of knowledge regarding baneful effects, hope to be rid of such evils. As for contagious disease acts and the revenue derived from the same, the two evils just mentioned are the parents of the necessity for considering the question, by irritating the whole nerve system, and especially that which is a part of and connected with the organs of sex. Such inherited irritability, and such still farther irritability by use of themselves or by sexual contact with those who do use the same, are causes that we are astonished at so few comprehending. As for the efficiency of such a vile measure as the infamous Contagious Disease Act, instead of lessening venereal diseases, it is increased. First, by the appearance of a freedom from the same when it is gnawing the intricate folds of the vagina and has extended into the uterus, where it is impossible to discover the true condition, as not even labor pains can relax the uterus without so much blood flowing that the true condition cannot possibly be seen. Second, by men rushing into vice because it is sanctioned by law, and they have full confidence in the examination protection. But the most infamous, and we pause for lack of adjectives to express any pure woman's emotions, of anything ever enacted by men, is that poor, seduced, helpless woman is made the disease-monger of man, under the guise of his being free from disease of the most agonizing nature, and seeking her because he is thus free and afraid of contamination, when the real fact is that by variety life he has become diseased, and thinks to rid himself by giving it to her. Nothing can partake of brimstone selfishness to so great a depth as such an act. But there is not a shadow of truth in the efficacy of such sophistry. The true logic is borne out by the facts, that the freer such cases are from any excitement, the better in all regards. But as long as men alone make the laws, they will not submit to an examination themselves to see whether they are free from disease and a liability to give it to women. If it is proper for men in the profession to examine prostitute women to see that they are free from disease for men's use, it is proper that women in the profession be also salaried to examine men prostitutes to see if they are free from disease for women's use. Now be startled with holy horror at such a proposition as this, but remember that it is only turning the tables in words. But when they are turned in reality, regarding all the one-sided sex outrages, the beauty of Tweedledee and Tweedledum will be as apparent to men as it is now to women. A few men are even now looking at this one-sided moral business and taking action in recognition of the necessity of purity in men. Messrs. Walter Mullerens, George Weir, and others in London have a Social Purity Alliance. Père Hyacinthe, Catholic, Zoadok Khan, Grand Rabbi of Paris, the Archbishop of Paris, Reverend Dr. Bauer, Episcopal of Germany, Reverend Mr. Cook and Sainte de Blumet of Geneva, M. Léon Richer and Théodore Monod of Paris, Joseph Nathan, Alfonso Favre, Salvatore Colonna, and Professor Darneth of Rome, Oris Brusca of Milan, Reverend George Butler, F. W. Benting, and A. L. Bernasty of Liverpool, Henry Richards, M.P., Sir Harcourt Johnson, Right Honourable James Stanfield, Edward Blackhouse, Dr. Nevins, Dr. Ruth, Dr. Drydale, Dr. Carter, Dr. Carson, Professor Stewart, Professor Sheldon, all from various places in England, besides many others that represent all the principal religions, the materialists and the spiritualists. It is to be hoped that the time is not distant when every community will have a Social Purity Alliance among men, where vices of all kinds will be discountenanced. The grand men whose names we have just mentioned give their culture, position, words, and examples to the great work. They attended the Geneva Congress last year, and one and all were disgusted with any sort of contagious disease acts or anything sanctioning manhood impurity. It is to be regretted that none of our finely cultured American women, who fully understand the basic principles of the foundation of all permanent reforms, a proper dress for women, were not present. One practical exponent of a moral reform costume would have given a tone and turn to the proceedings that would have sent reform a score of years into the grand future. Every living example of an emblematic dress of purity is worth 1,000,000 speeches from those women who preach reforms of any kind, while slaves to an immoral, bedecked, befurbelowed, and petticoated costume. Immoral women are disgusted with the inconsistency of such women, who urge them to leave a life that provides the same extravagance and show of dress. Such long-dressed women are ever calling forth the presumption in the minds of those they are working to reform, that there is the same want of proper protection of the organs of sex, and that the same facilities for vice can be found. And just as long as the ordinary long dress is worn, will there be such a presumption and such a reality. Cleanliness is next to morality. The fanning mill of even ankle drapery causes an accumulation of dust that reaches and excites the one who wears the same. The purity of woman generally cannot be assured until the immoral dressing is stopped, for it unfits woman in body for the duties of life by its weight, cumbrousness, and expense; in mind, by the drain of noble energies and following the ever-changing fashions. It is not frequent that a reliable and permanent structure of grand morality is builded upon stays, petticoats, and their accompanying absurdities, and the sooner the good men of the world see this and understand that human perfections of body, mind, and morals need sterner stuff than sham grace and drapery, which is but a fitting term for languor and helplessness, the world will be better in all regards. Let all men do what is possible to encourage a sentiment of beauty of mind and large understanding of brain and boots, instead of talking sweet nonsense and praising little feet. We call upon our so-called protectors to do their duty against the tyrant fashion. When this is done, women will need no protection from other tyrants. This monster one that sips vitality and virtue is the only one worth mentioning to be protected from, for all others will meekly bow when the tyrant fashion is destroyed. Women and their children will not be suicidists, but will gladly live as long as they can to be properly developed for another state of existence, and will not be constantly longing for something to quiet their nerves. Men for tobacco and whiskey, and women for gum and candy. Obscene publications. The law regarding obscene matter being sent through the mails is an eminently proper one, but in order to be effectual, the power to decide regarding the character of questionable publications should be in the hands of the scientific and morally pure. Of all that have been arrested, few have deserved to be, and instead of decreasing their sales, the very arrests have excited curiosity regarding them. Those making quotations from the Bible are the only exception. The officer that is so ignorant as not to be familiar with Bible history until informed in a court of justice by those defending themselves in suits for sending obscene matter through the mails ought to cut short the obscenity and make a raid on all the Bible houses in the United States in order to be consistent. We think the Bible should be read by every mature person, for the grandest lessons are learned of perverted human nature and the results of such perversion on posterity. The same immoralities with men making slaves of women were practiced then as they are today, and it would seem that the lessons learned from the Bible ought to prevent crimes of the darkest hue, especially with those who believe in its divine origin. That it does not proves more than many are willing to acknowledge, and were it not for the friends of about 50 of many of the ablest clergymen in this country, we should here publish their names as proof of the vilest of immoralities having been practiced by them, and in nearly all instances their victims were lambs of the flock, from the clergyman standing on the highest pinnacle of pulpit oratory to the meekest of the clerical profession. Something more than the ordinary religion was needed for such men, something plainer than even Bible history. Are their histories obscene? Not only do members of churches commit all the crimes on the Bible calendar, but the expounders of the Bible do just as badly, even to the incest of daughters, under the pretense at first that all fathers have such a duty to do, or their daughters would die, and afterwards threaten them with certain murder if they reveal the same. It is but a few years since such a case occurred in western New York, while the clergyman was officiating in all his clerical duties for about 3 years of the time. In Herkimer County, New York, in 1868, a woman having an only daughter about 17 years of age visited her friend at a distance, leaving her daughter to keep house for her father. She had been absent but a few hours when the father of the girl asked her if she knew why her mother had gone on the visit, and then informed her of the duty of every father, and how he hated to be obliged to perform his duty, and that her friend, who died a few weeks before, would have lived if her father had done so. When her mother returned, she was so weary with travel that she reclined on her daughter's bed in the most quiet part of the house. Soon after dark, her daughter, wearied with an unusual day's housework, retired with her. Late in the evening the husband and father returned from a neighboring town, where he had been delayed on some business. He came to the daughter's room, and immediately comprehending the situation, took hold of both his daughter's feet, as he supposed, to awaken her, but through mistake in one of the feet awakened the wife and mother. We lectured in the town where this occurred, but we have considered such a history too obscene to go through the mails to feed perverted taste. But we should be derelict in duty if we omitted here to show the infamous means taken by fathers to lie their own daughters into harlotry. In closing this chapter on social evil, we must impress men with the magnitude of their duty to women in every relation of life, not forgetting their protecting power in prisons, station houses, poorhouses, asylums, and hospitals. All of these are more or less under the actual surveillance of men, when the women are weak in mind, body, or morals, and more frequently than otherwise in all 3 regards. Opportunities are not wanting to make easy facilities for vice, and that they are sometimes improved by both the doctors, stewards, and others is a fact that cannot be denied, and that is a disgrace to civilization, since there are enough competent women doctors and stewards to manage the women's departments in all the institutions of the United States. It is the duty of men to so protect all the women needing any public charities, and all who are by them locked up for any cause whatsoever. They are not assuredly protected as women, unless every possibility of immorality is removed by women occupying every position relating to them. Men are reared with the one idea prominent, that there is a necessity for sexual relation with all men, and that all sorts of means to gratify their passions are in a way honourable, and wrongs to women will always result from opportunities, unless the language of the nerves is understood, and that there is no such necessity with men any more than there is with women. And when boys are taught, as girls are, to control their natural passions, they will do so as well, and when they become men, they will from habit be as pure. There are occasional proofs of this. When there are more pure men, we shall soon find all excuses for vice placed where they belong. One of the flimsiest to keep women in an absurdly unprotected dress is that it is unhealthy for women to be covered. Such talk from doctors, who were either knaves or were ignoramuses, have many times come to our ears. The fact is that a great deal of suffering is caused by a want of such protection. That it is a trick of the lascivious to have the facilities for vice easy is too patent for further mention, save that hundreds of women who have worn the reformed dress for over a score of years can testify in regard to such dress benefiting them in every respect. We do not know, as our duty is done, whether, again referring to Queen Victoria's domain and entering our protest against wrong wherever it exists, we refer her to the following facts and ask her to read our chapters on the language of the nerves and pure manhood, with the hopes that the wrong mentioned will be righted in the following manner. Pay her common soldiers so that they can afford to marry. Remove their restrictions on marriage. Repeal the Contagious Disease Acts. Make provisions for the honourable self-support of the hundreds of thousands of women that have been the victims. So good a woman as the Queen will not fail to do what is for the best good of her people when conditions are properly placed before her. The preventing only one soldier in 10 marrying in the English army has caused the government to pass Contagious Disease Acts to protect the soldiers. These were passed in 1866 and 1869. At the close of 1874, 245,727 examinations were made on healthy women and girls. If these had not submitted, they would have been imprisoned. The National Association for the Repeal of the Infamous Acts sent an address to the Friends of Morality and Justice in America, and were represented by Mr. Henry J. Wilson and Rev. J. P. Gledstone about 2 years. Since Mr. William Hayne, chairman, and Frederick Charles Banks, secretary of the association, the native women in India have committed suicide rather than submit to examinations by state surgeons under the English government. In Yokohama, under British government, brothels have numerals over the doors. In Hong Kong, brothels are licensed by the English government. We are opposed to having laws to compel vaccination, for it matters not how many cows the virus has been cleansed by, as long as there is enough of the poison to inflame the arm, there is enough to injure the system in insidious ways that can be understood by reading the language of the nerves. Better trust to the possibility of having one poison of smallpox in the system than to deliberately introduce what no one knows how many poisons it contains. End of section 13. Section 14 of Unmasked, or The Science of Immorality, to Gentlemen, by Mary Edwards Walker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 11, Hernia. 7/10 of the men are afflicted with hernia. This is too grave a matter to pass over with a mere mention of the fact. The reasoner will at once look for the cause, while the unfortunate sufferers are testing the remedies. Since all ages and both sexes are sufferers, we are surprised that no more remote causes than the crying of infants and the severe toil of adults should be mentioned. Here is a telling illustration of the truth that women cannot suffer without men being sufferers also. The ordinary style of women's dress, so debilitates the pelvic organs of woman that they are more or less prolapsed, as also are her abdominal viscera, the bowels. The whole of the organs of generation in women are weakened by their clothing. No petticoats, corsets, whalebones, or other fastenings around the waist can be worn without injury to woman's abdominal and pelvic viscera. Men could not wear the ordinary clothing of women without injury, but it would be far less injurious to them than to women, because they have no women's pelvic organs to prolapse, to displace, or otherwise injure. But while women dress in this way, their sons are injured through them, to such an extent that many are born with inguinal hernia. In some cases it does not appear until a year or two of age. In a large number of instances, the membranous tissue over the bowels and the muscular tissue over them are so weakened that hernia is the sure result, from overwork, a misstep, or from even less causes. When men evolve out of their might of ignorant oppression of scientific women who are dressing hygienically, and use their influence and money to further a general enlightenment and practice of the true object of clothing, their sons and grandsons will be free from the sure tendency to hernia, and not until then. It matters not what they may think regarding an ignorant standard of taste that is made by equally ignorant courtesans, and adopted by them, not as a principle of dress, for ever-changing fashions cannot be principles. A reformed dress is an embodiment of a principle, and as principles are eternal, men will have the satisfaction ere long to find that principles cannot be destroyed by any sort of oppression, but the real patriots and the true philanthropists will join with the philosophers in establishing the same. Dr. Nono, the leading man of the profession in Paris, wrote the author a letter in which he speaks of the ordinary arrangement of women's clothing being one of the most fruitful causes of the weaknesses and diseases peculiar to women. Dr. Banning, the great American inventor of uterine elevators, is explicit regarding the mechanical displacement of the abdominal and pelvic viscera by dress. Professor Phelps of Andover University, acknowledged to be one of the most learned in the profession, said to his class that the women of America would ere long be obliged to doff petticoats and put on pants, as the ordinary dress was an injury to the reproductive organs of woman and her whole nerve system. It requires a high order of moral courage for a scientific man to express himself on the subject, when we calmly look the facts in the face, that so large a number of the women are monomaniacs on dress. The general question now before the American people is not a monetary one, it is an invalid one. But examine the cut where the location of the organs of generation are plainly seen, and it will not be difficult for even the average man to comprehend what we have said regarding the mechanical injury of ordinary dress. It needs but little causality to readily see how hernia is the result of causes mentioned. While woman's generative organs are affected as men's cannot be, because they are essentially different, so women who have anteversion, retroversion, inversion, and prolapsus of the uterus not only transmit these tendencies to their daughters, but their sons have weaknesses of the organs of sex. Thus prolapsus of the scrotum may be directly the result of sexual excess, but there must be a weakened condition inherited to produce such a result, as is also the case with the other difficulties that do not result from contagion. The law of inheritance is observed as nearly as is possible with the difference of sex. End of section 14. Section 15 of Unmasked, or the Science of Immorality, to Gentlemen, by Mary Edwards Walker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 12. The Language of the Nerves. Part First. Men argue that as the male animals pursue and force the females to yield, Therefore the law of force in the sexual relations is the natural one for men as well as animal males, and that, as the male in the animal creation is always the one to take the initiative step toward the copulative act, that the question is thus forever settled, that it is best and right for men to pattern after brutes and beasts. As well might such reasoners tell us that as beasts live in woods and caves, it is the natural and therefore the best way for men to live. But so long as male brutes and beasts pursue the force system in sexual relation, and not wait until invited by female brutes and beasts, they can never rise to a higher condition. For while they so degrade the companion in their most intense nerve association, that associate gives back to them enough of the degradation of force in attempted resistance to keep the males down to nearly or quite the same level with the females, and often below them. It is an insult to the higher types of brutes to compare them sexually with average men, for there are few in the whole animal kingdom that have as frequent and excessive sexual relations as do men. Among the animal exceptions are sheep, and but for such relationship being limited to a short season, and entire rest the most part of the year, they would not long survive. Sheep growers have found that 5,000 ewes have conceived in one such season from a single male. It is not surprising that sheep should be so wanting in intelligence, when all of their vitality is expended in sexual relations, for the losses through this source are losses to the brain. The same elements that repair the wastes of the one are requisite for the other, and hence it follows that those who have the most power in either direction have the power to concentrate the greater part of such power to either the purely intellectual or to the sexual. Habits of thought and habits of life are magistrates, and the reasoner will at once see how important it is in youth and young manhood to cultivate the intellectual and higher faculties, and let the magistracy be of an ennobling nature. But to return. It is not a fact that in the animal kingdom the males are all tyrants and take the initiative steps in sex relations, for where they are living in a natural condition, the relations of the highest types of animals are mutual, called forth by the female. When the males assume rights of force, the females resist, and hence the quarrels. It is said no other cause of quarrels are known to exist between male and female animals. The supreme right of selfhood asserts itself even in animal motherhood abilities, and resists invasion upon its rights, feebly perhaps, but resists. The very desire for the copulative relation is one for the result of the relation, the offsprings, and yet the love itself is often as much in embryo as the offspring itself, so little is the subject understood because so little thought upon. And yet no man or woman can love another truly without a love for the future offspring that the relation of husband and wife is to produce. There is something wanting in pure love devotion, if that want and love of posterity is not felt, even if not expressed. The marriage relation from the first should and would be one of no false delicacy, but as a pure relation if both men and women were pure and true to themselves before marriage, reserving their emotions for the one who was to be the partner of all joys and sorrows through the dim vista of middle life and old age. Whatever else influences the youth of both sexes, neither sex should ever swerve from the one fixed purpose to love and cherish the future husband or wife, and never be guilty of act or deed that would destroy or lessen the confidence in sexual purity. The well-being and complete confidence and happiness of the marriage relation demands equal purity, and such demand cannot be disregarded with impunity. Cumulative wrongs before marriage tell the tale after marriage, perhaps not audibly, but tell it just as plainly to husband or wife. To illustrate, we see, feel, act, smell, taste, and hear all through the nerves. all these modes of communication are double, except the mouth, from which we send forth speech, and when that refuses to tell the truth, there is no power to stop the little telltale nerves. And so, when every energy of the whole system is concentrated through the most highly sensitive ganglion of nerves, the life story is told in the ears of the nerves they meet through the agency of the wonderful nervo-magnetic fluid. And although the power to fully comprehend just what the life of the other has been may not be possessed by all, yet a sufficient comprehensive power will be experienced to fully ensure perfect confidence or to convince of deception, and that of a nature that there is an object in the deceiver concealing forever. Part Second. If men were better informed in regard to women, they would understand how it is for their own physical and mental interest to respond to a wife's call as the ruling power in all sexual relations. Men would never force or even coax their wives to yield to them if the laws of the relation of the sexes were well understood, with all the insidious results of force or even of coaxing. Such is the construction of the nerves of the vagina that when they are not in a condition to bear friction, they are morbidly sensitive, and if compelled to endure it, either by stronger physical power or by persuasion, woman feels a repulsion to man through the shock to the sensitive nerves, and just as clearly as though he had struck her in anger. When man uses force to compel against the desire of woman, even if she is perfectly healthy, a poison is sent forth from the walls of the vagina that injures his whole system and shortens his days. So great is this poison that it sometimes produces an elongation of the urethra, causing intense pain, and has been thought by those not understanding the cause to be a cancerous growth. Some are able to walk about when thus afflicted, but months elapse before restoration is possible. The poison that produces this result is an abnormal forcing of the natural secretions of the vagina that are further poisoned by the stinging nerves of the vagina that act on the nerves of the penis when in the highest and most susceptible condition possible to any part of the system, and when beyond his power to resist the influences that are sent with more than lightning speed all through his whole nervous system. It is in this way that the copper blowing is accomplished in England. The angry wife holds a copper penny in her mouth, and when the orgasm is perfected by the infamous husband who forces her to yield to him, she blows with nearly closed mouth and poisons him to death. These two kinds of poisoning can be readily understood when we realize that the poison of a snake is harmless, unless the snake is angry and throws its venom into an otherwise harmless secretion as its only means of defense. Women unconsciously use the first poison spoken of as their only means of defense against repetitions of tyranny, and in aggravated cases have used the copper blowing as a perpetual relief from a tyranny worse than death. Nothing in life more aggravates and angers women than any advantage taken of the sexual relation, but men who complain of unappreciative and cross wives are generally utterly ignorant of the cause of the same, and often out of real spite, to punish them for something, compel them to submit to the sexual relation when they do not dare to strike them for fear of law finding the marks. Men see that these marital rapes quiet their wives for a time through fear of repetition, not fully understanding that the very quiet is a debility that will effect themselves as soon as a repetition is resorted to, and as soon as nature has struggled sufficiently to assert her right of individuality in woman. She feels the same anger so intensified that she resolves to kill her tormentor as a sure means of getting rid of a vile man that torments outside of the redress of common law. But if these men do not pay for such conduct by losing their lives, they pay dearly for such fiendish cruelty in their old years, by having helpless and loveless wives who lose all confidence in them and all interest in anything that relates to their comfort. The same unhappy feelings and unrest of soul that they caused their wives is taken back upon themselves by the very relationship that gives little else to such men than a fiendish gratification that never soothes and charms, but instead exhausts and leaves about as pleasant emotions as the conquest of killing a snake. And the wife, instead of being left tenderly as wives expect, and have a right to expect to be, they are left with about the same emotions of indifference as a dead snake would be left, or as a savage leaves a white woman after his captive raping of a woman who has been an hour in his possession, too frightened to have the power to even attempt a hopeless resistance. And yet, with this terribly truthful picture before us, with the mass of men feeling that they have a right to demand of wives and compel obedience in sexual relations, we look upon men with a charity that only one who has gone into the metaphysics of social life is capable, for no woman has enlightened them upon the subject of real causes and unmistakable effects, and no man has had the facilities to trace effect to cause and cause to effect as we have had, and no woman save a professional one could delve into social life with a full comprehension of causes and remedies. The whole question of the essential part is settled by woman always having supreme control of her person as regards an invasion by men. The sexual relation should be for posterity, and as soon as this is accomplished, there should be no other relation until another child is desired. No woman properly balanced and with perfectly healthy sexual organs has a desire for such relationship, and if she submits to the same, the language of the nerves is such that the child in embryo is so taught sensuality that the coming man or woman is affected for life with such antenatal influences. The prospective mother begins to hate the embryonic child, as her maternal love is all clouded or destroyed by sensuality, and she begins to devise ways and means to destroy instead of cherishing the little unseen. It matters little whether woman is a willing or unwilling victim of sensuality, whether as a wife or a promiscuous mistress, the love of posterity is destroyed, and the woman who fails to rid herself of her unwelcome charge brings into existence a sensualist, a thief, a robber, a hermaphrodite, or at best an inharmonious specimen of humanity that hates its parents for being compelled to have such an unwelcome existence. All through the period of its embryonic life, the language of the nerves is constantly taught, and the sentiments pervade every cell of the poor little piece of infantile helplessness. The truer one is to self, other things being equal, the deeper and grander the thoughts. Who can tell to what depths of unknown science the human mind is capable of evoluting, if the nervo-magnetic powers are not injured in utero, or by themselves in conscious existence? What grandeur of comprehension of the eternal principles of brain power the evolution of thought shall yet give to the world depends on pure manhood and pure womanhood to demonstrate. It is deplorable that many of the deepest minds, the most metaphysical reasoners, the clearest logicians, the grandest scientists, and the purest moralists among women must look in vain for their equals in all these regards, and die without leaving to the world specimens of humanity that shall be superior to themselves and capable of delving into the grandeurs and sublimities that are now beyond conscious possibilities. If through the evolution of our thoughts, as contained in this little volume, the women of the future on both sides of the great waters shall have better conditions, we shall feel that our earth life has been one of noble effort, that no amount of contumely from the degraded can rob of pure satisfaction. End of section 15. End of Unmasked, or the Science of Immorality, to Gentlemen, by Mary Edwards Walker.